Test one, two. All right.
I can't get this, no big deal, but I can't get this door to close again.
I had to slam it during
Oh,
PBS.
is that what it was?
I think
Oh,
it's
then-
like swollen.
Oh, then never mind. Oh, it's still on.
Good morning, everybody. Well, thanks for coming. So this is kind of part 2 in our Get to Know Matt Daniel pop-up class. Is that better? Okay, thank you. He's making gestures, and I wasn't quite sure what he was trying to say. So this is part 2 in our Get to Know Matt Daniel. And, you know, Flagler intended for the organist to be behind the mahogany screen, so we missed a lot of the action, unless, of course, you get the camera during the Linton concert series. So what we're going to do today is just do a short introduction. I'm going to ask Matt a couple of questions, and then he's going to go up in the loft, and we're going to hear Matt. So first of all, just in case people weren't at the last pop-up class, can you just give us a little brief introduction of who you are?
All right, well, I was born in Miami, raised up here. We moved up here after Hurricane Andrew. So so North Florida is really the only home I really know to any recollection. Grew up on Fleming Island, started playing the piano when I was 3, but the organ was really always where my interest was. So once I was able to reach down and get to the pedals, started that. And was in band and choir throughout high school, went to UNF on a full scholarship. And it was during my years at UNF that I met Ray and got my first introduction, well, not really my first introduction, but my first real introduction to this church. I remember summer of 1997, I believe, we hosted a family reunion, and I remember going to this church. So I vividly remember seeing this building for the first time, which really looked nothing like any Baptist church I had ever set foot into. And one thing I remember vividly, that the docent made a comment about how the baptismal font was made out of a piece of marble. Of course, when you grew up Baptist, you don't know what a baptismal font is, because we still use the dunk tank in a Baptist church. So I was looking all around this building trying to find it, and then when they pointed to this, I'm like, well, how does someone fit in there to get baptized?
Hunter just holds them upside down. Ducks them in.
Yeah, so then, of course, I gave my first concert here in 2013. Worked for, of course, grew up Baptist. My grandfather was a pastor. He was my first boss. I don't recommend that, but that's just my testimony. Then I went, from there I worked for the now closed St. Margaret's Episcopal Church on Fleming Island, one of the historic river churches. And from there I began an almost 14-year career working mainly in the Roman Catholic Diocese of St. Augustine here. Spent the longest time, I spent about a decade at a Holy Family parish on the south side of Jacksonville, where I really got to kind of spread my wings and really build a huge program over the years. I had, at the peak of my time there, we had one adult choir, and I had 2 different children's choirs, and just really comprehensive multi-generational music ministry. And we did everything from 8th and 9th century chants to pieces of music that were written today and everything in between. I gave my next concert here in 2022. Ray invited me back, and then I started teaching at Sacred Music Academy the following year, and then after a rather quick turn of events, I ended up starting here March 1st of last year. So that's the Reader's Digest version.
I love how that's so brief. And how old are you?
34.
34. It's been a long time since I've been 34, but my resume doesn't read like that. So talk a little bit about your influence on music. Like, who are your main influences? What's your, and I think we can all guess who your favorite composer is for the organ, but maybe talk a little bit about that.
Right, well, of course, growing up in the black church down south, of course, my real first influence, church music, I'll have that deep roots and fundamentals in the gospel tradition of music. And that's really sometimes when you hear some of my repertoire, or even when I improvise, mostly when I improvise, because one thing that a lot of people don't realize is in the gospel tradition of music, you're not looking at a hymnal, you're not looking at music in front of you. You have a melody in your mind and you have to follow the chords and kind of just go with it. So that's really where my heart and soul really is. And from there, of course, jazz was a close relative. But my grandfather, or my grandparents and my mother, they really wanted me to get formal training. And actually, our minister of music at our church in Green Cove Springs, she insisted that I got formal training as well. So I actually had the same piano teacher from age 3 until I went on to college. And he still is the only person who I allow to tune my piano at home. So we still do have a wonderful relationship. And also my minister of music growing up, she was actually here for my concert last year. She's about 80 now, but she still is very active in the community, very much in demand, one of the best gospel voices and one of the best Hammond organ players that I've ever heard. And we'll get a little bit more into that a little bit later. But yeah, so really classically trained. So I can't be an organist and not enjoy the music of Bach. Because it really, and I explain to all of my students now, both piano and organ, if you can understand Bach, everything else will start to make a lot more sense. But really, as far as organ literature, aside from Bach, my real bread and butter is the French Romantic music of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Louis Vierne, Charles-Marie Widor, César Franck, those are probably my 3 favorite composers, and a few others. And really, I've really developed a love lately for, it's a very small subset, but music written in the 19th and 20th century by some African-American composers. And actually, this is a good segue. This February, I haven't decided on a date yet, but this coming February I will be doing another major recital here, and it will be a program entirely of African-American composers. So stay tuned for something like this. Stay tuned for more details about that.
And if you haven't been here for one of Mac's recitals, you're definitely missing something. So we'll be looking for that. Most people don't know that you are a Baptist minister. So I've had some friends who have followed Matt, because if you follow his Facebook page, you know where he is. And he was off Sunday here, but he went and preached at his home church. And the reviews were very good. I can imagine that you're a very dynamic minister. So touch a little bit on how your role as a Baptist minister comes in with the organ.
Well, again, so there really is, and if you've never been to an African-American church on a Sunday morning, I highly recommend it. It's a completely different experience, a completely different sound. However, you will not be in and out in 55 minutes. Just go ahead and just get that out of your mind, because that's not happening. It's funny, my grandfather's funeral, actually, I actually had the great honor of preaching his funeral, and that service was about 2 hours and 47 minutes from beginning to end. And a lot of my friends who had never been to a black church, let alone a black homegoing service, were like, "You preached longer than our services were," and I'm so I did. But it's interesting. So many people's calling to ministry. My grandpa always says that some people go willingly and some people go into ministry being dragged, kicking and screaming. And I was definitely of the latter, because again, my grandfather was a Baptist pastor. My great-grandfather, my grandma's father, he was a Methodist pastor in Louisiana. And I remember growing up going all to these little country churches when he would preach revivals. And I got to be his musician on some of those trips when I got a little bit older. I had several uncles who were in ministry, a lot of cousins. So I always said, I'm like, well, there's enough preachers in this family. I'll just do music. That's how I'll serve. But there's an old saying that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
We got a question?
Yes.
What was your aha moment?
really, when my great-grandfather died, he passed away Christmas Eve 2016. After he had had cancer longer than I had been alive at that point. Of course, no one knew it until he got really sick because he was a very private man. But really just kind of that and just life kind of, looking back now, it just seemed evident that that's where the path was leading me. But just reflecting on his life and legacy, getting to give remarks at that funeral, that was really kind of the awakening moment where I realized that my ministry, there was another aspect to my ministry that I had not yet fully fulfilled. So licensed and ordained at I've got 2 home churches in Green Cove Springs, and they're about a mile apart from each other. But I was licensed and ordained by my grandfather and another pastor, longtime pastor at Mount Pleasant Baptist Church in Green Cove Springs, who this August, Pastor Wright will be celebrating his 50th anniversary as pastor of that church. And of course, our original church here was First African Baptist Church in Green Cove Springs, and my grandfather pastored St. Mark Baptist Church in Middleburg, and then he founded Emmanuel Baptist Church in Middleburg as well, and he served there until his health started to decline in 2018.
Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to give Matt some time to get up to the bench.
Right now, probably about 20 or 25 or so when everyone's here. Of course, summertime, it's difficult because people are going and coming. But we're always looking for new singers, so that's an absolutely shameless plug. So if anyone wants to, right now we're in summer choir mode, so we just meet at 10 o'clock on Sundays in the choir room on the 2nd floor next door. We'd love to have you. Come give us a try.
So Matt is going to let you head on up to the organ bench, but we've asked him to do is share some of his old favorite hymns. So we don't always get to hear that on the Aeolian Skinner, and Matt's the perfect person to do this. So the funniest thing, when Matt first got this job, Matt and I have known each other for many years, and he asked me, so how many church services do you have? How many masses? And I said, we only have an 8:30 and 11 o'clock. And he's like, that's it? I was like, yeah, we're God's frozen chosen. We come to church at 2 times on Sunday, and that's it. So he thought he had died and gone to heaven.
Yeah, just as a slight aside as I head upstairs, when I was at Holy Family was a very large church. It had 1,700 registered families, not members, families, so probably about 5,000 or 6,000. So any given weekend, there were 5 weekend masses, 1 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday morning, 1 on Sunday evening. And my typical Christmas Eve/day, I'd have about 6 or 7 services split between those 2 days. And Holy Week was a Sunday to Sunday thing. So I actually shared with Hunter my first Holy Week here. Of course, I started a month before Easter last year, which, baptism by fire. But when I was sitting down planning everything, I just had this haunting feeling in the back of my head. I'm like, surely I'm missing something. And it took him about 4 or 5 times to assure me I had it all.
Okay, all righty. So a lot of people ask the question about the mahogany choir screen. Did Henry Flagler intend for the choir to be back there? And I always like to correct people and say, kind of, because really the only person who was relegated to being behind the screen when this church was built was the organist. And the organ console was actually located a little bit further up from where Matt is seated. So it was right behind the screen. Actually, where Matt is seated up in the choir loft is where the original console was. I should say the casework was actually a lot further up. And in those days, that was the only person back there. We did not have a formal choir until the 1920s. There was an organist named Russell Joy who came to Memorial, and he had been the winter organist. And when I say winter, you'll know what I mean, Palm Beach. He was the organist at Whitehall. So I would dare say if your resume came along and you had Whitehall or any tie to Henry Flagler, you got the job. But Russell Joy was actually a very good organist, and he organized the first choir. And that was in the 1920s. 1928, we had a rebuild of the Roosevelt organ, and part of that was moving the casework back so that they could have a few rows for a choir, and that's when the choir was born in the choir loft. Putting them in front of an organ is not the place to put a choir, especially with an instrument this powerful. So it's not ideal, but it's basically now tradition. So, Matt, you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
And before I play anything, just to piggyback on that, if you've not been up here before, hearing the organ up here is a completely different experience than hearing it down on the floor. Because the most important stopper, the most important voice of any pipe organ is the room that it sits in. So up here, I hear and the choir hears the sound raw as it's coming right out of the chamber before it gets to mix into the room. And there's so many times during the week where I will have to record everything that I'm playing and play it back downstairs so I can listen for balance, because it's really difficult to get an idea of what the organ sounds like from up here. So again, having a fairly unique background of different congregations that I've served, I've got some of my favorite hymns. Some of them are, of course, deeply rooted in the gospel tradition, some of which do find their way into our service today. Then from the Anglican, the Episcopalian tradition, and also from the Roman Catholic tradition. And I see a lot of them in the hymnal. So I'll start off with, so one of my favorite hymns, of course, when I speak of hymns in this sense, I'm speaking of the text, not the music itself. But one of my favorite hymns is All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name, of course. But in the African American church, that is not the tune that we sang that hymn to. I'm not sure if it's in this hymnal as well, but there's another hymn, there's another tune that I will always love when it comes to this text. So I'll start off playing a little bit of that. So I want you to think about that text. All hail the power of Jesus' name, let angels prostrate fall, bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. But we're going to do that I'm going to play that to a different tune just to give you an idea of what that would sound like in the gospel tradition. Some of you actually might know this tune. Again, so a slightly different, not slightly, a completely different feel to that hymn with that particular text. But even when I'm playing the hymn tune Coronation that we normally would sing that to here, I'm still thinking of that other tune in the back of my head. And another instance of a good gospel hymn that I really enjoy, this was actually my grandfather's favorite hymn, Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine. And in the gospel tradition, the organ that we would use would be a Hammond organ, and some of you might be familiar with that organ. It sounds completely different than a pipe organ, and the Hammond organ is most famously paired with a Leslie speaker, so the sound is actually spinning around. So this instrument's got some tremulence on it, which will kind of, so you hear that kind of wah, wah, wah. So I'm going to play a little bit of Blessed Assurance using a little bit more of a gospel approach. So this is not how you would hear me play it on a Sunday morning here. So bear with me 1 second just to make a few adjustments. Alrighty, and another one, and actually a little bit of a backstory. One thing I love about the old hymns of our faith is they typically, if you look at the text, and I really enjoy diving into the text of hymns, they tend to tell a story, either something directly from Scripture or something so deeply related to a central theme or message of our faith. And another one of my favorite hymns in the gospel tradition is "It Is Well With My Soul." And a little backstory for that, the composer Horatio Spafford, he was a very successful businessman in the Chicago area. And he was traveling, and then the Great Chicago Fire completely wiped him out. And while he was trying to, pick up the pieces, he sent his wife and his 3 young daughters overseas. And while the ship was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, it sank. And all 3 of his young daughters drowned, and his wife was the only survivor from his family. So when she got over to Europe, she sent him a telegram, "Saved alone." And in his grief and his anguish, he was able to pen the words, and that first verse especially, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." So anytime that hymn is brought up, I always think of that story. Just that wonderful triumph, that kind of anguish and sorrow of that first verse, and then when we get to the final verse, a bit of hope. And Lord, haste the day when faith shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll, the trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, O my soul. So a little bit of that. So on this one, I'm going to use more of the strings. We've got lots of different families of sounds on the organ. So now I'm going to use the strings. So this is going to give a nice little lush texture. Right, I'm going to come down to the central level for just a second, because we're doing far better on time this time. And see if anyone's got any other specific questions about the organ itself or anything else. So anybody got a little trouble seeing distance, so if I don't see you, just go ahead and just kind of shout it out. We're all friends here. That's a good question. So the question was how many ranks? So just for those of you who do not speak organese, this organ is, the main bones of this are a 1970 Aeolian Skinner. And now the Skinner Organ Company, for its whole history, was the premier organ builder, from Ernest M. Skinner himself in the early part of the 20th century, later by G. Donald Harrison and some of the others. The Skinner Organ Company really was kind of the Rolls-Royce of organ building in the day. So the main bones of this instrument were installed between 1968 and 1970, and that is a total of 90 ranks. So a rank of pipes is a set of pipes, so all the different voices. So there are 90 different sets of pipes. During the rebuild in about 2012-ish or so, the instrument was enlarged. They added 2 more ranks of pipes. They added a clarinet, which if you were at the early service, you heard the clarinet on display during communion today. And they added another diapason. A diapason is kind of the main fundamental sound that an organ makes. That brought the pipe rank count to 92, but then this organ in the 1960s, there was a shift. Skinner organs were known to be very robust, very full sounding. In the 1960s, for some reason though, there was a shift back toward a more Baroque style. So Baroque, think of the music of Bach and such, so earlier music. So the organs stopped being as robust and big and started sounding a lot more shrill and high-pitched and very thin sounding, and that's really the first iteration of this organ was more like that. So they added more color sounds to it through Walker Technical, which is a digital company. So the total rank count of this organ is 155. There are 92 pipe ranks and another 63 digital ranks to augment those. So it's a whole lot of sound. That's the translation there, a whole lot of sound. And the main case is up here, obviously. Over here you have the antiphonal organ. Now the pipes you see over there on the antiphonal side, though the pipes you see are not speaking pipes. They're dummy, what we call dummy pipes. The way you can tell is if you look, those pipes are all about the same size and perfectly symmetrical. That doesn't really happen, because if you look at these pipes at the main case, which are not symmetrical, that's how you know they're speaking, because for each different note that the rank encompasses, each pipe is slightly smaller as it gets higher. So that's how you can tell. Over here is the echo division along the south doors, which you cannot see, because that's fully digital, so that's just, the grill cloth is hiding speakers over there. So good question. Yes. Yes.
The whole church vibrates. Is that what it's supposed to do?
Yes. And it's one of the, the longest pipe in this instrument, if it was completely uncurled, it would sit 32 feet long, and it could be crawled straight through. It's huge. And again, those sounds are meant more to be felt than heard. Again, they're very, especially the lowest notes, you can feel, you can hear them, but they're almost inaudible. But it's one of those that if I didn't use them on some of the fuller registrations, you'd know, because those kind of bottom out and round out the whole sound. But yes, those are absolutely designed. And actually, there are a few digital 32-foot ranks, and the speakers on those are so large, they actually are bolted to the wall so that they don't actually move. Because they shake, and they actually are bolted and tied to the outer walls of the building so that they don't actually shake out of their enclosures.
Ellen, hold on.
Yes.
Much lower in notes and
yes.
much higher than notes?
The organ, low C on those low 32-foot pedal sounds is cycling at about 17 hertz, 17 cycles per second. And the highest pitch, the smallest pipe in this instrument is about the size and diameter of a golf pencil. And that is cycling at several thousand cycles per second. So a piano keyboard has more keys, but of course a piano keyboard is only able to play in one register. I can play far lower than the lowest piano key and far higher as well, depending on which stops I'm using any given time.
Is this the largest organ that you've ever played?
It's a very good question. Actually, so yes and no. By total rank count, this is the largest, but by total pipe count, it is not, because I played at the Jacoby Symphony Hall in downtown Jacksonville. I've played that instrument, and that instrument is 97 ranks, which is smaller than 155, but that is 97 true pipe ranks. There's no digital in that instrument. So it's the largest by pipes, but this is, and actually, that's interesting, that is the only organ that has got more pipes than this instrument in all of Northeast Florida. See, this is one of the largest pipe organs in all of the state of Florida. And it's the largest by pipe, it's the second largest by pipe count, but the largest by total voice count in all of North Florida.
One thing I want to encourage you to do is when you get home this afternoon before you take your nap, whip out your computer and rewatch this, because Tim in the back is actually using the cameras in the choir loft. So when Matt is up there playing, you can actually follow what he's doing as he's talking. So I would encourage you when you get home to rewatch that. And it's on the YouTube channel for Memorial Presbyterian Church. Yeah, for a show every week, just join the choir, yeah.
How often does the choir sing, or the congregation, Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring? Is that a congregational hymn or just a choral hymn?
Well, that tune, I don't believe that tune is in our hymnal. I know the choir owns that octavo. I'm actually playing that at communion next Sunday, and coincidentally enough. So yeah, so at 8:30 I will be playing that piece next Sunday.
Anyone else? Oh, hold on. Hold on, Mary.
Were you ever in choir growing up?
Oh yes. Because growing up, especially in a small country church, you were doing something. You didn't just get to really sit in the pews. So I had a children's choir robe on from the time I was 4 years old. But that's how I really got to see the action happen, because I played for my first church service when I was 9. Yes.
Matt, we're doing really well on time.
Okay.
So are you brave enough to take a request?
Depends on what it is.
Miss Kay, you got a request? Yeah. In the garden?
Okay, can do that.
Can we do that?
Sure can.
All
In the
righty,
garden.
let's do it.
Now, while I'm up here, because this is something that you will never get to hear by itself, but someone was inquiring about the low pedal stops. So this is that lowest pipe I was telling you about. Oops, not that one. And actually, so that's low C on the low pedal principle. Again, it's felt far more than it's heard. The choir always says when I use them, it gives them a nice back massage up here.
If you're ever coming in after the 8:30 service and you're wondering whether or not they're finished, that's what you come in through this door here on the northeast side or northwest side, and I always wait and to hear Matt, and I know when the organ goes full organ, the walls shake and everything shakes, and I'm like, okay, now it's safe to go in. Are there any other questions? So, did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yes. Because again, since I learned, my fundamental learning of music was learning how to play by ear. Now, as a music reader, I can actually, and not every musician can do this, but I can actually hear the music in my head as I'm reading it on the sheet. So I've got a way of conceptualizing it. And a lot of times with organ music in particular, the composers all depending, the French composers especially, they're very particular about which sounds they want you to use on the instruments. So that's how when you hear the registration changes, a lot of time it's the composer. Now on English organ music from Britain, they just give you different dynamic levels and it's just your guess. Again, you kind of have to hear the music of what should this sound like. And of course, whereas if as a pianist, you know pretty much whatever piano you're going to go to, it's going to sound like a piano. And this being a very large instrument, I've got lots of tonal resources at my disposal. There's some repertoire that I play here that I simply cannot play on certain instruments because there's not enough voices for it. So I'm really able to, with an instrument this size, I'm able to really unleash all of my repertoire on it.
So Matt, when you're deciding what to play, and the registration comes into this, how long does it take you from the time you pull that music and then you do the registration on the organ? How long does that process usually take?
It depends on the difficulty of the music. So for example, actually a good example of this, the first 2 times I've played this instrument in recital, I always like to give myself 3 to 4 days of practice time on the instrument. On the first day I came to prepare my 2022 recital here, the first day I actually did not play anything on the program cover to cover. Day 1 was just simply setting my registration, seeing what I wanted the instrument to sound like. Now, since I live with the instrument all the time, I've got a better idea of what it's going to sound like. But whenever I'm traveling to a different instrument, it can take me a full day, if not more, and that's a full 4 to 5 hour practice day of just pulling out the stops and just getting to know the instrument and the room. Fortunately on this instrument, as I mentioned, since it's got a digital control system, I can record myself playing, come down here and play it back so I can actually hear it. I can walk around. Actually, Terry sees me all the time wandering the room, listening to myself play, just so I can get it, because I want to get an idea of what it sounds like, because I know as many good Christians, you have your pew. You have sat in your pew for years, if not decades, and heaven forbid someone comes and sits in your pew on a Sunday morning. But I know we are all so kind and nice here, so that never happens here. But sitting here versus sitting in that corner versus sitting down there versus sitting over there, 4 completely different sounds. So I like to walk the entire room just to get an idea. And of course, there's one other factor that I cannot mitigate, and that is when actual bodies are in the pews, the sound changes again. Because you don't have as much reflective space. The wood, the floor, all that reflects the sound. And the more people in here, the sound is absorbed a little bit more. So it's really more of an art versus a science. And also I have to mitigate on a Sunday morning even, especially now that we were in the hot, humid months of the year, I have to sometimes adjust registration due to the organ's tuning. If something is abnormally out on a Sunday morning, I don't feel like going into the chambers and correcting it, I have to alter course. And thankfully, since when you've got 150 something ranks, something's going to be in tune. I can do that.
We'll make that our finale.
Sounds good.
Perfect.
Yep. So I'll improvise a little bit on that. But so just as I'm heading back upstairs, so James Weldon Johnson and his brother John Rosman Johnson grew up in Jacksonville. They went to the old Stanton High School, and Lift Every Voice was, again, one of the most iconic pieces, and yes, it has its roots right here in good old Northeast Florida. So a little bit of Lift Every Voice and Sing to close things out.
Matt, thank you so much for everything. And thank you all for... At least we know we won't have to dust the organ anytime soon. Ray McDonald used to say, I have over, I don't know how many pipes there were. I used to be able to tell you that. But he said, somebody paid for all those pipes. It's a shame not to use them. And I think Matt has subscribed to that same theory. But thank you so much, Matt.
Well, good news is now that this week after the fumigation, we will be able to repair the divisions that have been termite damaged. So we will be hearing about 12 ranks that have been offline for about a year plus now. So by the end of the summer, hopefully, when me and Chaz can get in there, we'll be able to hear everything again.
Excellent. Thank you all for coming this morning. Our next pop-up class will be in August, and it will be a day in the life of our pastors. So that will definitely be something that you'll want to pay attention to. So thank you again, and have a great week.